The sun had only just begun to peek through the dusty windows when she arrived at the towering office building, broom in one hand and a worn-out bag in the other. Her shoes were scuffed, her uniform faded from too many washes, but her back remained straight, her resolve unbroken. She was the cleaning lady, someone no one really noticed unless a spill needed to be wiped or a trash can overflowed. Every morning, she moved silently through the polished floors, the grand lobbies, and the endless hallways, her presence blending into the background of wealth and success that filled the space. Her day began long before the executives arrived. She would mop floors, polish the glass walls until they sparkled, and make sure every office was pristine for the people who would barely spare her a glance. Coffee stains left behind from late-night meetings, paper scraps scattered near desks, and muddy footprints in the lobby. She cleaned them all without complaint. Each task was done with quiet diligence, though no one praised her for it. To most, she was invisible, just part of the building like the furniture or the flickering lights. Yet behind her tired eyes, there was resilience. Life had not been kind. Poverty clung to her like a shadow, bills piled higher than her wages, and dreams of a better life often felt far out of reach. Still, she carried them in her heart. Simple dreams, enough food for her family, proper shoes for her younger sibling, and perhaps one day, a small home of her own where laughter could replace the constant worry. Despite the struggles, she never lost her gentle smile. Each broom sweep, each polished corner was more than just a job, it was her way of fighting for dignity in a world that rarely saw her worth. The boy sat in the enormous mansion, surrounded by toys that sparkled under the glow of expensive chandeliers, yet none of them brought him joy. He was the son of the millionaire CEO, heir to an empire most could only dream of, but his little heart was heavy with loneliness. His father was always away, either in meetings, on phone calls, or traveling across the world in private jets. His mother had long since left the picture, leaving him in the care of nannies who came and went like passing seasons. To the outside world, he had everything, a gilded childhood with every luxury money could buy, but inside, he carried a quiet sadness that no one seemed to notice. Most afternoons, the boy would wander through the mansion's endless corridors, his small footsteps echoing in the silence. He would peek into rooms filled with treasures, grand pianos, exotic paintings, shelves of books, and closets lined with clothes he never wore. None of it mattered, because what he longed for was something much simpler: love, warmth, and someone who would listen when he spoke. His toys stayed untouched, stacked neatly in corners. Even the colorful playroom, designed to look like a wonderland, felt empty without laughter to fill it. When his father was home, the boy would often sit quietly nearby, hoping for a glance or a pat on the head. But the CEO's eyes were always glued to his laptop screen or his phone, his voice stern as he barked orders to subordinates. The boy's questions went unanswered, his drawings unnoticed, his small victories ignored. He began to believe he was invisible in his own home, much like the cleaning lady was invisible in the office. At night, he would stare out his window at the stars, clutching a toy car to his chest, whispering wishes that someone, anyone, would hold him and tell him he mattered. Behind his innocent face was a silent plea. He didn't want riches, he wanted affection. And though he didn't know it yet, the comfort he craved would come from the most unexpected place. It was a quiet afternoon when the boy's loneliness spilled over into tears. He sat curled up near the corner of the garden steps, hidden away from the eyes of the nannies who were too busy scrolling through their phones to notice his trembling shoulders. His soft sobs echoed faintly against the marble walls, but no one cared enough to check. No one, except the woman who had slipped into the mansion grounds that day to scrub the floors and polish the windows, the cleaning lady. She had been assigned to tidy up the outdoor patio, her hands red from scrubbing, when she caught sight of the little figure sitting alone. At first, she hesitated. It wasn't her place to interfere. She was just the help, invisible and unnoticed, taught by years of hardship to mind her own business. Yet something about the boy's fragile posture tugged at her heart. He looked so much like her younger brother back home, who cried in the same way when hunger or sadness overwhelmed him. She couldn't ignore it. Quietly, she wiped her hands on her faded apron and approached, her footsteps soft so as not to startle him. "Are you all right, little one?" she asked gently, kneeling beside him. The boy lifted his tear-streaked face, surprised that anyone had even noticed. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. She saw the pain in his eyes, pain that no toy, no amount of money, could heal. Without thinking, she reached into her worn-out bag. Nestled between a small packet of bread and a folded scarf was a tiny bottle of soap bubbles. She always carried it with her. For years, when life's heaviness became too much, she would blow bubbles just to watch them float away, a reminder that even sadness was not permanent. Unscrewing the cap, she dipped the small wand, lifted it to her lips, and blew. The boy's eyes widened as shimmering bubbles drifted into the air, catching the sunlight and breaking into rainbows. For the first time in a long while, his lips curved into a smile. His small hands reached out, trying to catch them, laughter bubbling out with each one that popped on his fingertips. The cleaning lady's heart softened at the sight. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, just a simple act of kindness, but in that moment, she had given him something money never could: comfort. The bubbles floated higher, glistening in the golden light as though carrying little pieces of magic within them. The boy chased them eagerly, his tiny arms stretched upward, his laughter filling the garden like music. Each bubble that burst left him giggling, urging her to blow more and more. The cleaning lady smiled softly, her tired face easing into warmth she rarely allowed herself to show. It had been so long since she had seen pure joy in a child's eyes. She dipped the wand again and blew, sending a stream of shimmering spheres into the air. Some drifted gently, others burst quickly, but all of them held the boy's attention as if they were treasures beyond measure. He clapped his hands together when one landed on his nose and popped, leaving a tiny droplet of water. For those few moments, the vast mansion, the loneliness, the silence, all of it disappeared. What remained was simple: a boy laughing freely, and a woman who gave without expecting anything in return. The boy looked up at her with wide, sparkling eyes. "Do you always carry bubbles with you?" he asked, his voice trembling with wonder. She chuckled softly, nodding. "Yes, I do. Life can feel very heavy sometimes, and bubbles remind me that everything, even sadness, is light enough to float away." He tilted his head, thinking deeply about her words, though he was still so young. She told him a small story about how bubbles carried wishes when you blew them into the sky. His face lit up instantly. Closing his eyes tightly, he whispered something under his breath and blew on one of the bubbles she made. It floated gently before popping, and he gasped as though the universe had just accepted his secret prayer. She did not ask what he wished for, she didn't need to. His longing was written all over his face. For the first time in his short life, the boy felt seen. Not as the son of a CEO, not as an heir, but as a child who wanted nothing more than love and laughter. The cleaning lady gave him what no amount of wealth ever could: a moment of innocence, a reminder that he mattered. And for her, too, those moments meant everything. She forgot her aching back, her sore hands, her endless struggles. In the boy's smile, she felt lighter, as if the bubbles had carried her burdens away too. The garden was alive with laughter, the kind that hadn't echoed through the mansion in years. The boy's giggles rang out as he darted after the floating bubbles, and the cleaning lady's gentle smile followed him, her wand dipping into the tiny bottle again and again. Neither of them noticed that they were not alone. From the shadow of a balcony that overlooked the garden, a tall figure stood silently, watching. It was the boy's father, the millionaire CEO, home earlier than usual, his briefcase still in hand, his expression unreadable. He had intended to slip into the house unnoticed, to get back to his laptop and prepare for another evening of meetings, but the sound of his son's laughter had stopped him. It was so unfamiliar, so rare, that he had to pause. He followed the sound and found himself frozen in place, staring down at the sight below. His son, glowing with happiness, and the cleaning lady, a woman of simple clothes and weary eyes, blowing bubbles like she was sprinkling magic into the air. For years, he had bought his son the finest toys, the newest gadgets, even a custom-built playroom filled with wonders, but none of them had ever pulled that kind of laughter from the boy. Watching now, the CEO felt a pang of something he didn't recognize at first: guilt. His wealth had given his son everything except what mattered most: joy, love, presence. And here was this woman, who earned less in a year than he spent on a single business dinner, giving his child the one thing money had failed to buy. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. She wasn't extraordinary in the way society often defined beauty or power. Her uniform was faded, her hands roughened by labor, her posture slightly tired. Yet there was something about her gentleness, her patience, the way she truly looked at his son, that made her stand out more than anyone else in his life. He had seen countless people grovel for his attention, eager to benefit from his fortune, yet here was a woman who seemed to want nothing at all, only to see a lonely boy smile. The CEO's chest tightened as he leaned against the railing. He told himself he was just curious, just observing. But deep inside, he knew something had shifted. He had never realized how much he had failed his child until that moment, when a poor cleaning lady, with nothing but soap bubbles, managed to do what all his riches could not. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, and strangely humbled. The bubbles had been the beginning, but they were not the end. After that first day, the boy began to seek her out whenever she was near. While the other staff treated her presence as background noise, the boy would watch her quietly as she mopped the marble floors or dusted the shelves. At first, he was shy, simply sitting nearby while she worked, his small hands fiddling with toys he never played with before. She noticed, of course, but she never pushed him away. Instead, she would smile at him, sometimes humming soft tunes while she worked, letting him feel that he was welcome. Soon, their quiet companionship blossomed into something more. The boy began asking her questions, about the broom, about her scarf, about the tiny trinkets she carried in her bag. She answered with patience, never dismissing his curiosity. Sometimes she told him small stories, tales she had once shared with her younger siblings at home, stories of courage, kindness, and hope in simple things. He would listen with wide eyes, hanging on to every word, his imagination sparking in ways no expensive toy had ever inspired. One afternoon, she found him struggling with a puzzle toy. Instead of scolding him or snatching it away as some nannies had done in frustration, she sat down beside him, guiding his little hands with her rough but gentle fingers. Together they completed it, and when the final piece clicked into place, the boy beamed with pride. "We did it!" he exclaimed, and she clapped softly as though it was the grandest victory in the world. For him, it felt that way. Day after day, their bond deepened. He began to wait for her, asking the staff, "When will she come again?" He followed her around the mansion as though she were the most important person there. She, in turn, treated him not as a burden but as a child deserving of love, listening when he spoke, praising his small efforts, and offering the comfort he had been denied for so long. For the cleaning lady, those moments became precious. Though her life outside the mansion was filled with hardship and worry, inside those walls, with that little boy holding her hand, she felt something close to family. And for the boy, her presence filled the aching void that wealth and luxury had never touched. In each other, they found what they were missing: connection, warmth, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest bonds are the most profound. From that day forward, the CEO found himself observing more than he ever had before. Meetings still consumed his hours, phone calls still demanded his attention, but whenever he was home, his eyes drifted toward the places where his son and the cleaning lady might be. He told himself it was curiosity, that he simply wanted to ensure his staff were doing their jobs, yet deep inside he knew it was more than that. Something about their connection pulled him in, making him pause, making him wonder. He would watch from the top of the staircase as his son sat cross-legged on the carpet, listening with rapt attention as she told a story about a bird who carried dreams on its wings. He would stand quietly in the hallway as she helped the boy build towers from blocks, her laughter mingling with his when the tower tumbled down. The sound was unfamiliar to him, his son's carefree laughter, and each time he heard it, guilt pressed heavier on his chest. The CEO began to notice details he had overlooked for years. His son smiled more now, asked fewer questions about why his father was always away, and seemed brighter, livelier, as though some invisible weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. And all of it was because of her, the woman who mopped floors and scrubbed windows without complaint, yet gave more to his son in a few weeks than he himself had given in a lifetime. At night, lying in his expansive bedroom with its cold silence, the CEO replayed what he had seen. He thought of how his son clung to her hand, how she knelt to meet him at eye level, how she listened with genuine care. He thought of how easily she smiled, despite her hardships being evident in the roughness of her hands and the weariness in her eyes. Why did she give so much, when the world had given her so little? The more he watched, the more questions gnawed at him. For the first time in years, he wondered if all his success meant anything at all. The empire he had built could buy luxury, but it could not buy his son's happiness. That truth unsettled him. And each day, as he silently observed, he couldn't shake the feeling that the poor cleaning lady was teaching him a lesson he had long forgotten, one about love, humanity, and what truly mattered. Not everyone in the mansion looked kindly on the growing closeness between the boy and the cleaning lady. Whispers began among the staff, the cook, the maids, the butlers. At first, it was harmless gossip. Surprised that the usually withdrawn child now smiled more, surprised that his cheer came not from toys or tutors but from a woman in a faded uniform. But soon those whispers twisted into envy and scorn. "She's getting too comfortable," one maid muttered, watching the boy slip his small hand into the cleaning lady's as they walked through the hallway. "She forgets she's just here to scrub floors." Another staff member sneered, "The master will never allow it. People like her don't belong in this world." The harshest disapproval, however, came from someone far more powerful, the CEO's mistress, a woman of sharp beauty and sharper ambition. She had worked hard to secure her place by his side, carefully curating an image of glamour and sophistication. The thought that her position could be threatened by a cleaning lady, someone with no wealth, no pedigree, nothing, burned her pride. She noticed how the CEO's gaze lingered sometimes when the cleaning lady passed. She noticed how his son clung to the woman, as though she were the only source of comfort in his life. And in those small details, the mistress sensed danger. She could not allow a poor nobody to gain favor, not with the boy, and certainly not with the man whose fortune she intended to share. Her disdain grew bolder. She mocked the cleaning lady in front of others, criticizing her appearance, her clothes, her mannerisms. "Pathetic," she scoffed one evening, her voice dripping with venom. "Does she think blowing soap bubbles makes her special? Anyone could do that." Yet despite her cruelty, the boy defended the woman fiercely, snapping in his small but determined voice, "She's kind to me." "You never are." The sting of those words cut the mistress deeply, fueling her resentment further. Soon, she began scheming. If she could find a way to disgrace the cleaning lady, expose her as unworthy, paint her as someone with hidden intentions, she could ensure the CEO dismissed her permanently. Envy and fear twisted together in her heart, driving her to plot. For the first time, the cleaning lady's quiet kindness had created not only love in the boy's life, but also dangerous enemies lurking within the mansion walls. The mistress and staff may have whispered behind closed doors, but the CEO had grown too curious to rely on gossip. One evening, after dismissing his team of assistants, he called the cleaning lady into his study. She walked in nervously, clutching the edge of her apron, unsure why she had been summoned. The room was lined with leather-bound books and grand paintings, worlds apart from the cramped home she came from. She felt small in that space, but her eyes met his with quiet dignity. "I've noticed you spend a lot of time with my son," the CEO began, his voice even but probing. "Why?" Her heart skipped, but she answered truthfully. "Because he's lonely. He needed someone to listen, someone to care. I only wanted to give him what I wish I had as a child." Her words were simple, but the sincerity in them silenced the suspicion in his mind. For the first time, he asked about her life. At first she hesitated, her world was one of hardship, so different from his polished existence. But as he pressed gently, she revealed her truth. She had grown up poor, the eldest daughter of a struggling family. Her father had passed away young, leaving behind debts and younger siblings who looked to her for survival. She had worked tirelessly, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, taking any job she could find to keep food on the table. Education had been a dream she had sacrificed so her siblings could stay in school. Now, even as an adult, she lived with constant struggle. The wages she earned barely covered rent in her tiny home, let alone bills and medicine for her ailing mother. Yet despite it all, she carried small joys with her, like the bottle of bubbles. She explained softly, "They remind me that life can still be beautiful, even when it's hard." The CEO sat back, stunned. He had spent his life chasing power, dismissing anything that didn't generate profit. Yet here was a woman who had nothing, yet carried more strength and compassion than anyone he knew. She was not trying to impress, not trying to gain anything. She spoke with raw honesty, and in her story, he saw a resilience he himself had never known. It was in that moment that his perspective began to shift. She was not just a cleaner. She was a survivor, a protector, and, most importantly, the light his son had been missing. That night, long after the cleaning lady had left and the mansion had gone quiet, the CEO sat alone in his study, staring into the flickering glow of a single lamp. Her words replayed in his mind, refusing to fade. For the first time in years, the silence around him felt heavy, pressing down on his chest. He had built empires, signed deals worth millions, and climbed to the very top of the business world. Yet when he thought of his son's laughter in the garden, and the way it had only appeared when she was near, the truth gnawed at him. He had failed in the one role that truly mattered, being a father. He remembered birthdays he had missed because of conferences, promises he had broken because of late meetings, and the countless times he had brushed his son aside with the words, "Not now, I'm busy." He remembered the emptiness in his son's eyes whenever he returned from a trip, carrying gifts that were meant to replace his absence. He had convinced himself that money and luxury were enough, that providing material comfort absolved him of his neglect. But now, watching the bond between his son and the cleaning lady, he realized just how wrong he had been. The CEO leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand over his face. His wealth had insulated him from many truths, but not this one. His son's happiness came not from riches but from simple gestures, someone kneeling to listen, someone holding his hand, someone laughing with him. And he, with all his power, hadn't been able to give that. It was humbling, even painful to admit. His thoughts turned to the woman who had unknowingly exposed this truth. She had every reason to be bitter, to give in to despair, yet she chose kindness. She gave freely, without expectation. In her, he saw what he lacked: resilience, compassion, and the ability to love without condition. It unsettled him, but it also awakened something long buried, a yearning to be better, not just as a father but as a man. For the first time in years, the CEO pushed his work aside. He no longer felt the same pride in his empire. Instead, he felt a hollow emptiness that only one thing could fill, reclaiming the role of father his son desperately needed. The shift came sooner than anyone expected. One morning, as the cleaning lady arrived with her usual quiet humility, she was stopped at the front gates by two staff members. Their expressions were sharp, their voices laced with authority they rarely used. "You're no longer needed here," one of them said coldly, thrusting an envelope of wages into her hand. "Pack up your things and leave. You've gotten too close to the boy." Her heart sank. She tried to reason with them, insisting she had never overstepped, that all she had done was comfort a lonely child. But the other servant sneered. "Don't play innocent. Do you think the master will ever look at someone like you with respect? You're embarrassing yourself." Their words cut deep, though she bit back her tears. She knew they weren't acting on their own. This was the work of the mistress, whose jealousy had grown unbearable. Just then, the boy appeared at the top of the staircase. His small face crumpled in panic when he heard the exchange. "No! Don't send her away!" he shouted, racing down the steps and throwing himself into the cleaning lady's arms. His little hands clutched at her apron as if letting go meant losing the only happiness he had found. "I need her," he sobbed. "Don't make her go." The staff tried to pry him away, but before they could, a firm voice echoed through the hall. "Enough." The CEO stood at the doorway, his commanding presence silencing everyone. His eyes swept over the scene, the terrified boy, the trembling woman, the guilty staff, and his jaw tightened. "You will not dismiss her," he said sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She stays." The staff lowered their heads in shame, retreating quickly under his glare. The mistress, who had been watching from a distance, clenched her fists in frustration but dared not speak. The cleaning lady looked at him, stunned, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She had expected him to turn a blind eye, as the rich often did, but instead, he had defended her. In that moment, something shifted between them. He was no longer just her employer, and she was no longer just invisible staff. He had chosen to protect her, not only for his son's sake, but because deep down, he knew she had become something far more important than he had ever imagined. The days that followed felt different within the mansion. Where silence and cold formality had once reigned, warmth began to seep in like sunlight through heavy curtains. The boy, no longer fearful that his dearest friend would be taken away, grew more animated than ever. His laughter echoed in the halls as he raced down corridors with the cleaning lady by his side, showing her hidden corners of the vast home as if it were a playground meant only for them. The CEO, though still busy, found himself drawn into these moments. At first, he lingered in the background, pretending to check his phone while his eyes followed their games. But slowly, he began stepping closer, sitting quietly as they built block towers, watching as they painted pictures on the patio, even chuckling under his breath when bubbles floated past his face. Each time he witnessed their joy, a small crack formed in the walls he had built around his heart. Even the mansion staff, once dismissive, began to notice the change. The boy smiled more readily, ate his meals without protest, and slept peacefully at night instead of tossing and turning. The atmosphere of the house shifted, the once sterile rooms now filled with laughter, soft conversations, and the faint sound of humming as the cleaning lady went about her tasks with the boy trailing after her. For the CEO, the transformation was undeniable. Where once the mansion had felt like a cage of stone and wealth, it now carried hints of something it had never known before: life. And though he would not admit it aloud, he knew the source of this change was not his money, not his power, but the gentle presence of the poor woman who had shown his son what true care looked like. The CEO hadn't expected it, but feelings began to take root, quiet and undeniable. At first, he thought it was only gratitude that this woman had brought light back into his son's life. But the more time he spent near her, the more he noticed details that stirred something deeper. The way her eyes softened whenever she spoke to the boy. The way her laughter, though rare, rang with sincerity. The way she carried herself with dignity, even in her faded uniform. One evening, as he passed through the garden, he found her kneeling by the boy, teaching him how to plant a small flower in a clay pot. Her hands guided his gently, her voice patient and encouraging. The boy looked up at her with pure trust, and the CEO felt an ache in his chest, a longing he hadn't known he was capable of. He realized he wasn't just watching a bond between his son and the cleaning lady. He was yearning for her presence too. But she, unlike the many women who had pursued him for status or wealth, remained distant in her humility. Whenever his gaze lingered too long, she lowered her eyes. Whenever he tried to thank her, she brushed it off, insisting she had done nothing extraordinary. Inside her heart, she carried hesitation. She knew the vast gulf between their worlds. He was a man of power and prestige, while she was a woman scraping by on wages too small to survive. Love, she believed, was not something she could allow herself to feel. Yet feelings have a way of revealing themselves. There were moments when their hands brushed accidentally, or when he caught her smiling as the boy laughed, when time seemed to pause. The CEO began to wonder if wealth truly mattered when a single act of kindness had done more than all his riches. She had shown him that love was not measured in gold, but in small, selfless gestures. For the first time, he found himself imagining a life beyond business meetings and empty relationships. A life where warmth, laughter, and love were not luxuries, but the very foundation of home. And though she fought to deny it, he could see the flicker of the same feeling in her eyes. The mistress had been watching, her bitterness growing like poison in her veins. Each day she saw the boy clinging more tightly to the cleaning lady. Each day she noticed the CEO's gaze softening in ways it never had for her. What started as irritation soon turned into fear. She had worked too hard to secure her place in the millionaire's world: expensive dresses, glamorous parties, her carefully crafted charm. She would not allow it all to be threatened by a woman who smelled of soap and carried a bottle of bubbles in her bag. Determined to put an end to it, she began weaving lies. She whispered to the staff that the cleaning lady was manipulative, that her kindness was just a mask hiding her true ambition, to trap the CEO. Soon, rumors swirled through the mansion like wildfire. "She's only pretending to care for the boy," one maid muttered. "She's after the fortune," another added. The mistress struck harder, going directly to the CEO. One evening, dressed in her most elegant gown, she confronted him. "Can't you see what she's doing?" she demanded, her voice dripping with venom. "She's using your son to get closer to you. Women like her always want something. They see a rich man and scheme their way in." The CEO listened in silence, his expression unreadable. The mistress took his silence as agreement and pressed on. "If you don't dismiss her now, she'll ruin everything. She'll ruin your reputation, your life, your son." But what she didn't expect was that the cleaning lady herself would hear these accusations whispered later by the staff. The words pierced her heart. She had never wanted anything from the CEO. Her only intention was to comfort a lonely child. Yet now, faced with the poison of lies, she felt exposed, humiliated, and unworthy. That night, she quietly packed her things. She told herself it was better this way, better to leave before the boy became too dependent, before the CEO was forced to choose between her and the glittering world he belonged to. Her hands trembled as she folded her uniform. For the first time since she had met the boy, she cried. The boy sensed something was wrong the moment he woke to find her absence. Her usual soft humming was gone, her gentle footsteps missing from the halls. Panic gripped him as he searched room after room, calling her name, his voice cracking with fear. When he finally spotted her near the servants' quarters with a small bag in hand, his little heart shattered. "No!" he cried, rushing to her side and clinging to her leg. "You can't go. Please don't leave me." His tears streamed freely, his sobs echoing louder than ever before. "You're the only one who makes me happy. You're the only one who cares." His small hands clutched at her apron desperately, as if his grip could anchor her to him forever. She knelt, hugging him tightly, her own tears falling as she tried to soothe him. "I don't want to leave you either," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But sometimes people like me don't belong in places like this. You have your father, and you'll always be loved." But the boy shook his head violently, his words bursting out through sobs. "It's not the same. He doesn't laugh with me like you do. He doesn't blow bubbles. He doesn't love me the way you do." The raw pain in his voice pierced the walls of the mansion. Servants froze in the hallways, and even the CEO, hearing his son's cries, felt a stab of guilt he could no longer ignore. The CEO had heard his son cry before, tantrums, frustrations, the spoiled demands of a lonely child, but this was different. The sound of his boy's voice that night was not anger, it was heartbreak. Each sob echoed like a hammer against the walls he had built around himself, shattering the silence he once thought was strength. He stood at the doorway, watching the scene unfold, his son clinging desperately to the cleaning lady, her arms wrapped around him as if she could shield him from the entire world. For the first time, he saw clearly what his wealth and authority had blinded him to. His boy wasn't asking for toys, tutors, or vacations in distant lands. He was begging not to lose the only person who had given him genuine love. In that moment, the CEO felt the weight of his own failures as a father. He had provided everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. He realized that the woman about to walk away had accomplished something he never could. She had filled his son's empty heart with warmth. The accusations the mistress had spat replayed in his mind, but now they rang hollow. He saw no greed in the woman's eyes, no scheme in her tears. Instead, he saw humility, sacrifice, and a love so pure it humbled even him. As his son's cries grew louder, the CEO stepped forward, his voice unsteady but firm. "Don't go," he said, his words directed not at his son but at her. "If you leave, you'll break him. And if you leave, you'll break me too." It was the first time he had admitted aloud what his heart had already decided, that she was no longer just a cleaning lady in his house. She had become the very soul of his family. The next morning carried a stillness that felt different, almost hopeful. Sunlight streamed into the grand mansion, but for once it did not feel cold or distant. The boy awoke curled safely in her arms, his small hand still clinging to hers as if afraid she might vanish. She stroked his hair gently, her heart torn between staying and leaving, uncertain of where she truly belonged. When she rose to continue her duties, the CEO stopped her in the hallway. Gone was the guarded, stern man of business. In his eyes was something softer, more vulnerable. "You don't have to wear this uniform anymore," he said quietly, handing her the bag she had tried to pack the night before. "You belong here, not as a servant, but as part of this family." Her breath caught. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of pity or obligation. But all she found was sincerity. The boy appeared then, running to her, his little arms wrapping around her waist. "You're not leaving, right? You'll stay with us forever?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. She felt her resolve weaken, her doubts melting away in the warmth of their embrace. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not marked by endless labor or invisibility, but by love, laughter, and belonging. That day marked the beginning of something new. The boy had his smile back, the CEO had rediscovered the meaning of family, and the cleaning lady, once invisible, had finally found the home she never knew she needed. In the end, what began as a simple act of kindness, a poor cleaning lady blowing bubbles to calm a lonely child, changed the lives of 3 people forever. The bubbles that floated so effortlessly into the air carried more than fleeting joy. They carried love, healing, and hope into a world that had been burdened by loneliness and mistrust. The CEO, once hardened by wealth and business, discovered that true riches were not measured in profits or possessions, but in the laughter of his son and the warmth of a woman who asked for nothing in return. The boy, once restless and withdrawn, found security in the arms of someone who loved him unconditionally. And the cleaning lady, who had lived invisible for so long, finally learned that her heart, her gentleness, and her resilience were treasures far greater than gold. Their story became proof that kindness, no matter how small, can ripple outward, breaking barriers of class, wealth, and fear. Love had bloomed in the unlikeliest of places, reminding them, and all who watched, that sometimes it takes the simplest gesture to change everything.